Bonsoir. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this new session of the Laboratoire of Lyric titled Care to Care. Mutual aid has existed since the origins of humanity. It's generally defined as a voluntary and reciprocal exchange of resources and services for mutual benefit. It is also a form of political participation in which people take responsibility for caring for one another in an attempt to effect social change. Mutual aid is most often practiced in marginalized communities. It can be food aid programs, such as the one famously led by the Black Panthers in 1969, who served breakfast to the most disadvantaged, but also solidarity clinics, as seen, for instance, in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. The solidarity clinic movement gained momentum during the anti-austerity uprisings of the Indignados in 2011. Set up in unused stores, offices, or apartments, they offer the services of volunteer health professionals and thus challenge medical hierarchy and bureaucracy. They inspired artist and activist Cassie Thornton to conceive her latest project, the Hologram, for which she published a feminist peer-to-peer self-help manual dedicated to health. But mutual aid is far from being reserved for professionals or already organized groups. It arises in crisis situations. The activist, sociologist, and lawyer Marina Sitrin, who notably took part in the creation of the Occupy Wall Street movement, has collected the testimonies of mutual aid communities from all over the world since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, together with Collectiva Sembra, in order to publish a book, Pandemic Solidarity. So I'm thrilled to welcome Marina Sitrin and Cassie Thornton in the lab tonight. They will both present their work for about 20 minutes each, and then we'll open the discussion. So please post any questions you may have in the chat, and we'll take them after the presentations. I also have a little gift for you tonight, as Pluto Press, the publisher of both the Hologram and Pandemic Solidarity, generously offers a 30% discount to everyone watching this session. So if you're interested in Marina's or Cassie's books, you can go to plutobooks.com and enter the code PP30 when you order. So that being said, I'll introduce Marina with a few more details and we'll listen to her. So Marina Sitrin is an associate professor of sociology at SUNY Binghamton in New York. She's the author of Horizontalism, Voices of Popular Power in Argentina, published in 2006, Everyday Revolutions, Horizontalism and Autonomy in Argentina, published in 2012, and the co-author of They Can't Represent Us, Reinventing Democracy from Greece to Occupy, which came out in 2014. So Marina, the mic is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for having us. I look forward to the conversation. Yeah, so even just in the beginning, kind of my location, even though I work in a university, I see myself as located first in movements, in groups and societies in movement, and then try as much as possible to help facilitate voices of people in movements so that different books and projects actually come from. And the book, Pandemic Solidarity, that I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit in the beginning, it's, I think, a very beautiful cover, was very much a collective process. So I helped kind of edit it overall. It was as a part of Collectiva Sembrar. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit too, because I think the process of how it did is very much a reflection of this experience of mutual aid and care. But just kind of as an overarching, the idea of mutual aid and when it happens, and I'd love to have more of a conversation about how we can help, which I know Cassie asks in her book, how do we help this to happen more when it's not a crisis? But absolutely, when there's crisis, and by crisis, that can be an economic crisis, it can be a political crisis, it can be cultural crisis. I mean, crisis in the sense of when the ways in which we function or even the ways that we see things get challenged in a really big way and shaken up. And that can kind of cause us to see things differently and to behave differently. But what inspired the Pandemic Solidarity book, obviously, is this current crisis, this pandemic that I do want to say, as beautiful and inspiring as stories are that have been collected from around the world in Pandemic Solidarity, the situation is so horrible for so many people. So it's not trying to make light of that. It's trying to think together that with crisis can also come this beauty. And it's kind of hard to think about holding both horror and possibility together, but it is what we're forced to do right now. But in crisis, so like this pandemic, so often what people do is look to one another. And that can be like in this pandemic, but it also happens, sure, many people who are listening have been around in the time of maybe a hurricane or a flood, or when there was a power outage for a long period of time, or a fire. Certain crises, and in these crises, in these moments, we are taught in societies around the world that what happens in crisis is people panic. We are just out for ourselves. This is especially a narrative in the United States, that people are only about themselves, a kind of Hobbesian narrative. You know, we reach out to protect ourselves. In the United States, it means with guns to protect what's yours. And it's this whole story that's told about ourselves that's completely untrue. It's not what happens in crisis. And that's both sociological studies and organizational sociology that shows that. Also, we know this from our day-to-day experiences, each of us, that in these moments of crisis, what people do is turn to one another. And it's often, almost always, these formal institutions that are supposed to help take care of us don't. And so we have to come together, but it's also just what we kind of naturally do. And so what we've seen all over the world with COVID and the pandemic is people turning to one another in their neighborhoods, in schools, finding ways to check in and help each other. And so it's kind of this counter narrative that inspired the book Pandemic Solidarity. There was a small group of us. It was an ethnography seminar that I teach with international students, so people from all over the world. And we were talking about, it was March, the very beginning of our learning about the depth of the pandemic and what it means. And it was one woman, Shema from Turkey, talked about, what the government of Turkey was saying versus what she was hearing from her friends and family. And someone else, Barati from India, shared a very similar story. And so we talked about, well, what could we do? Could we help facilitate some of these stories of what people are actually doing, our stories, our history? And very naturally came together. So Debarati, for example, from India, has a good friend in northern Iraq who she invited to become a part of the book. And I invited someone I know from having organized Occupy Wall Street, for example, Vanessa, who's from Brazil and was back in Brazil. And then she invited, Laissent, who was located in Portugal, who invited Raquel, and kind of in this way of personal, social, political networks, we ended up with participants contributing to the book from all over the world: South Korea, Taiwan, Southern Africa, Argentina, parts of Mexico, almost all women, all except for I think 2 people, or women. And that's something that I think we should talk about too, the gendered nature of, and that Cassie for sure talks about, the nature of care and this care work and mutual aid work. I also think it's a phenomenon related to broader movements in these last 20 years too, that also has to do with care and trust and love-based organizing. But so we came together as all of these mostly women from around the world and decided to facilitate these stories. So we would have these weekly Zooms starting in the end of March from all over the world, all, negotiating different times, talking about really the different experiences that we were either participating in or observing. And that is how we very quickly, by the end of May, put together Pandemic Solidarity. And that process of the Zooms, of talking to one another, of kind of sharing both the struggles we were facing personally and perhaps with our families, or many of us have children, with our children in the time. We were supporting each other and talking about that. It was that space that we created in the process of doing the book, also in and of itself kind of emulated these other spaces of mutual aid and care. So Nancy from Argentina at one point referred to our kind of what we were doing, our colectiva, as a life jacket. So we didn't even start out as a colectiva. It was the process of doing things together that we decided, actually, this book is so collective. We are a collective process. And sembrar in Spanish means like to grow. Like in the beginning of a seed, you would sembrar, you plant a seed and it siembra, no? So that was kind of the idea. We were collectively beginning to grow with one another. And we can talk in the discussion more if it's helpful about some of the examples, but without even planning it. And this is kind of the scope of how much we people take care of one another in these crises. We didn't make a list of countries that we wanted to address. It was people who knew people, and we all just knew. That kind of knowing that's like thinking, feeling, knowing. We don't have a word in English for this idea. Like even in Spanish, some people will say like senti pensante, like to think and feel together. But we kind of knew in our feelings that this was happening all over the world. And it was. And interestingly, the different stories that people facilitated were also really different. All elements of what's happening right now. But for example, in Turkey, a lot of the neighborhood organizing took the form of things like people going out in neighborhoods, not making Facebook groups so much, but actually putting up flyers with little pieces of paper that had phone numbers, especially so elderly people who tend to not be on the internet so much, or for economic reasons, people who don't have access could just pick a phone number and call. And so they were coordinating food and continue to food, figuring out who needs health support. But they also coordinated like a social space. So many elderly people who are alone, or even not elderly, people who are alone. This is a long time to be in different types of quarantine. So they would have like tea hours, and someone would call someone else and just talk on the telephone and just listen and get to know them. And that being a piece of this mutual aid and solidarity that's so key. In Southern Africa, the contributor Boaventura talks about how the different networks that had existed, many of these groups predated, they went back all the way before apartheid and the struggle against apartheid in South Africa and Southern Africa, hadn't had a very close relationship. And through organizing around the pandemic, how those networks became closer, tighter. There is an overlap between Greece, Argentina, the US, and people talking about prisoner support and that relationship with people who are in the prisons. So really deep solidarity. The health clinics in Greece were addressed a little bit too, but I won't talk about that now. I think we'll talk about it in the discussion, and that's, such the arc of Cassie's beautiful book. We started the book, and I think this is important to say too, with one of the chapters is on Rojava. So in northern Syria, the autonomous territory that's striving for more direct and participatory democracy and gender equity and diversity. And people should read about it more if you haven't read about Rojava. And at first we thought, well, maybe we would end the book with it. And then we decided, no, that too often our imaginations, we have all of these experiences and we conclude with something like, and look at what could be possible. And instead we decided we should start from the very beginning with, that what would seem impossible in a place in northern Syria is actually possible. So let's start with a very concrete, what could all of this mean? What could it be? And that's something else I would love to talk about in the discussion, that all of these experiences of people finding different ways to feed one another in a time of crisis, create networks of care, of health, taking care of one another's children, organizing education, the question of loneliness. In Italy, there's a story of a young girl, like a teenager, young teen, who coordinated taking care of people's pets. So frontline workers, what happens to their pets all day long? So it could seem very simple, but all of these different elements that actually weave together the fabric of what society is, day-to-day life, our needs, including sociability, taking care of pets, taking care of children, all of these things. And by starting with Rojava, it's starting by not just asking, but saying society can be organized differently. And as horrible as these crises are, they also break open our imaginations as to what's possible. What we've been told about ourselves, it turns out, is totally different. We organize in a very different way than we're told to organize. we're told we can't do so many things. And in fact, we do them. Not just we can do them hypothetically, we do them, we are doing them. So imagining that going outward, why couldn't we just reorganize society? And I say that in a way that sounds kind of flip, but it's not a but, it's an and it's not. It is actually occurring, and sometimes holding a mirror up to ourselves to see what we're doing helps us, to kind of have that buoy, that extra inspiration as to what's possible, making it more concrete. And a lot of this, this is the experience right now with pandemic solidarity, but the work I've done in the past, participating in and helping to facilitate voices of people in other places and other movements, it's very similar. This experience happens again and again throughout history. There are crises. Capitalism produces crisis. And people organize ways of taking care of one another in these and through these. So that Horizontalism and Everyday Revolutions, both of those books are about the 2001 economic crisis in Argentina. And total economic crisis, people's bank accounts are frozen, there's nothing. And people come together by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions. I mean, first it's saying that they all must go to get rid of the government, turning their back on these institutions that have failed us again and again, to create something different, to create neighborhood assemblies, to take over workplaces and run them together cooperatively with forms of what they call horizontalidad, this sort of like direct democracy with care and creating new relationships together. And that, is one huge moment in history where we've seen that post-2011 in many parts of the world, from Greece to the Plataforma, for example, in Spain, a housing movement that started before the depth of the crisis, coming out of 2008, even before, but how that blossomed in people making sure other people aren't getting evicted and doing so in a way that's grounded in care. It's starting in discussions, in checking in with one another, and in these really important affective, like afectiva, you would say in Spanish, relationships of love and care and trust, and then making sure from this base people are housed. And so I think if each of us thinks about it, whether they're huge movements like Argentina, like the Plataforma in Spain, or just in your neighborhood. I know where I am, I'm going to look that way. I have neighbors on that side and on that side. And by some wonderful luck, we all have children similar ages. And the children not only play together, but we take care of each other's children. I have to work late, something happens. These kinds of things are very small examples of a kind of mutual aid, but we don't always think about them in those terms, kind of making them more political. You have a large garden, you bring your extra tomatoes and your neighbor brings you something else. Like all of these are the basis that I think, and many people believe, could be a basis for a whole new way of imagining society. So I think I'm going to stop here. There's so many places we could go in this conversation, but I would love to hear Cassie and then have a discussion.
Yes, thank you so much, Marina. Yeah, it opens so many areas. Yeah. So first we're gonna hear Cassie before opening this incredible discussion. Cassie Thornton, she's an artist and activist. She refers to herself as a feminist economist, and she says she's actively preparing for the economics of a future society without the tools of oppression, reproduction, such as money, police, or prisons. She is also the co-director of the Reimagining Value Action Lab at Lakehead University in Ontario, Canada. So please, Cassie, go on.
Sweet. I actually am going to share my screen in a second because I think it's easier. It's easier for me to have that structure, but I wanted to just start by saying, like, I'm in what is now called Canada. I'm about 6 hours north of Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed, and I live in a city called Thunder Bay. I've been here for about 4 years, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about really comes from learning that I've done being a part of anti-debt struggles in the US. And then I think all of my work is really, really impacted by working with Anishinaabe women here in several grassroots organizations. I think you'll see, and I'll be able to point out some of the things that I've learned from this work here and how it's kind of colored and changed the way I'm thinking about organizing. And obviously I love pandemic solidarity and I love Marina's work. So I'm really excited to be here. And I think that this conversation about crisis is just so interesting to me because I think where my work has always been as an artist and as an activist has been struggling with the idea that that we have been in crisis for a long time, but nobody could really acknowledge it. And because we couldn't acknowledge it, we couldn't become creative together. And so it's been a really interesting moment to be working on a kind of mutual aid project when a lot of people who just months before, a year before, weren't able to acknowledge the fact that they were living in a crisis, now they can, and now they're willing to put energy into different things. And so a lot feels possible, even as there's so much loss and so much hardship that feels also, we have new types of impossibility at the same time as we have new paths towards creative ways of organizing society differently. So I've been working on a project for about 5 years called Hologram. I'm going to just open up a slide, so it might take me 1 second. And I'm going to play it and hope that it doesn't freak out. Does it work? Can we see it? Great. So the Hologram is a peer-to-peer feminist support network. I think it exists in 2 important ways. One is as an idea, and I think this book that we're talking about today from Pluto Press, this book is part of one way that the project exists, which is as a story of a completely different way that we can organize society and organize our energy and our labor that uses all the stuff that we already have. Like you can shift your relationships, you can shift what you ask for and what you communicate about, you can shift your relationship to time, and you can shift your relationship to value with many other people at the same time without really needing more resources than you already have. And so I think the Hologram is a story of one way that you can do that. And so it can exist as a rumor about a possibility. And I think it can function just like that. And at the same time, it's a really big project and it's a social practice. It's a specific set of guidelines and structures that we can follow to produce a different experience of care support, mutual aid, emotional labor. So it actually is a kind of protocol for a viral peer-to-peer health model. So it exists in these 2 ways at once. And I think the point of it either way is to say that it is possible to create peer-to-peer care that can ensure that more of us are stable and healthy so that we can survive the current and coming crises, which we know are here to stay. And that hopefully that we can exist together in better ways now and past the end of capitalism. And we also say now, the sort of collective that works on it, we say that it is practiced by lots of people all over the world from their couches. And the real inspiration came from the social solidarity clinics that happened all over Greece at the height of the financial crisis in the early 2010s, which was also a refugee crisis. And Marina is really an expert about this. And really because of Marina's introductions, I was able to be introduced to a specific project called the integrative care model that was practiced in Thessaloniki and is still practiced, And this project was trying to challenge hierarchy in care. So they were like giving free care, but they were also wondering, can we give better care? Can we give care that doesn't have a lot of the implicit hierarchies? And so they did lots of different experiments, but there was one particular one that really moved me, and that I think in a weird way, it really challenged me to think about what was possible. And at the time I was living in the US without medical insurance and without medical care, as were most of my friends. So it felt really revolutionary to see what they were doing there. So I'm going to describe really quickly kind of what they were doing, because it gives a great way of describing now what the project called the Hologram has become. So the first thing to say is that when you entered the Social Solidarity Clinic of Thessaloniki, you were referred to as an incomer and not a patient, because everybody needs care. It's just a matter of whether you're coming in or you were already there. And so to kind of take apart that thing, which is like, as a person receiving care, that like you must be broken or there must be something wrong with you to fix. It's just that everybody needs care. You were seen by three people at the same time. One was a doctor or a general practitioner. One was a therapist. And the other was either a nurse or a social worker or a volunteer. And I think the really cool thing is that person sometimes was just a person, not necessarily a professional. And those three people would sit with the incomer and ask them questions, everything about their family, but their work conditions, their food and where they get their food from, their financial situation, their loneliness, their feelings, and all of these things went onto something called the health card. But the fact is that these three caretakers got to see all of these different sides of this person's holistic health. And this to me just felt like amazing and kind of beyond belief, even though it's also something so obvious. So I think the question that we all have now are, how do you organize your own care before or during an emergency within a set of completely unstable conditions? The conditions were unstable then, but now everyone can agree that they are unstable and that they will continue to be unstable. And that's for a much wider group of people. So what was happening in Greece at the time it's been useful all along, but it seems now more than ever like so much to learn from. At the time that I had visited the Social Solidarity Clinic of Thessaloniki, as I said, I was living in the US, and I was spending a lot of time with a group of people that we were trying to figure out what peer support would look like for really precarious activists and artists. How could we try to do something like what they were doing in Thessaloniki? So these were the questions we were faced with, like, how do we do this without experts? How do we do this without space or money or stability? And maybe now more than ever, how do we do this when we're all a little bit sick? How can we do this when we've been taught that we can only trust experts? And how can we do this when we don't necessarily feel like we trust ourselves? So the proposal that we came up with at the time, specifically me and my friend, who was a big part of the community acupuncture movement, was that if we could take what they were doing in Thessaloniki and make it into a peer-to-peer model, this could really work for us and our friends. So the idea would be that instead of the incomer, we call the incomer the hologram. And the hologram invites three people to support them, but not as experts. So taking the idea of like the non-hierarchical model practiced in the Social Solidarity Clinic and really trying to like maximize that lack of hierarchy. And so what the idea is that each person would ask questions of the hologram, and one person would ask questions about mental and emotional health, and one person would ask questions about social health, and one person would ask questions about physical health. But of course, like these things, they are completely blurry and overlapping. And asking questions is complex, but also it's something that anybody can do. So, the idea was that we would do this in a series of meetings. So the hologram would bring together these three people and say, okay, we're gonna do this for an hour and a half as a trial. At the end of that, like, let's decide, maybe we could do this every 3 months. the hologram stays in our structure. The hologram stays the same, and the three roles stay the same. So the three people asking questions are called the triangle, and they meet as a group, like, as the group decides, but hopefully in a kind of regular way over a long period of time. The goal is that nobody really needs to be able to make decisions alone. So the hologram, say that she meets with her triangle every 3 months for a year. Over that time, the triangle can ask really good questions and, of course, learn to ask better and better questions. In that period of time, they can see the patterns that come up. So maybe there's patterns of language, maybe there's patterns of behavior, and maybe it's just an amazing chance to get to co-observe those patterns. If the hologram kind of reaches a point where there's a bigger decision to make, like a doctor says, you need to have a kind of expensive surgery, maybe the triangle can do some co-research with them, because when you're in an emergency, it's kind of hard to think straight. And I think the most important thing is that over time, with the goal of doing this for a really long time, that the three triangle members really become like a living medical record for the hologram. And I think a really important thing about this is that we're really, like coming from the position of the social solidarity clinic and the integrative model, we're really trying to take what they were saying about the importance of everybody getting care in a non-hierarchical way. We're really trying to amplify that in this project. So we call the incomer the hologram, and that's clear, but we see the hologram as an expert about their own health. We also see them as a teacher, but I think it's kind of special what they teach, because it's actually all about the hologram asking for exactly what they need in a world where asking for help is really shamed and undervalued, that by modeling asking for really specific forms of support, they enable other people to do that too. And it is hard. It is so complicated to actually ask for long-term support, especially in a world where most people themselves don't feel supported. And that is all, I'll explain more about how that becomes a kind of more of a culture that moves through more people. So I'll explain that in a second. The triangle, their job is not to solve problems. And I think this is another huge part of this project. The triangle who asks questions of the hologram, their job is to feel alongside the hologram. So often, I think we misunderstand the idea of offering support as being like, let's fix your problem. But I think in this case, and I think what I've learned from my friends that are a part of radical disability communities, is that what you really need at difficult times and consistently between all other forms of care is other people to understand alongside you how you're doing, to feel with you. And the other job is to be really curious. And so that's a part of asking questions, and that's obvious, but this takes a different form, because the question asking becomes really creative, because you're trying to find ways to ask the hologram questions that allow them to think and allow them to respond in ways that makes them feel comfortable enough to speak, but also maybe helps them think through things in ways that are outside of their regular thought patterns. So it really is this a really, really interesting way of asking questions as a way to support somebody. And I think also to ask questions in a way that we don't always get to do, which is because it's a long-term practice, it's not about proving oneself. You're honestly asking questions out of curiosity to build knowledge. And finally, the job is to become a living medical record. I opened the wrong presentation. So we do this over a long time, or we do it just once. And we've developed lots of different ways to organize this stuff online. So we offer different models where you can kind of sign up and have a facilitated experience doing the hologram with 3 people you know. And it's just a one-time thing. But I think the real job, or the real work that this project does, is to help us actually reimagine time and really do some radical planning, because obviously it's really hard to think more than a week in advance right now. Will we be in lockdown? Like, what will be happening in my city? What will be happening in the world? It's really hard to tell. But we can actually plan some of this more like these relational structures that can create support. So you can imagine doing it every 3 months for a year and what that would feel like. And then you can imagine doing it every 6 months for 5 years. Imagine doing it for 20 years and what it would be like to have 3 people with you over that amount of time. It's really incredible, like the kind of stability that could create, especially when so much is happening in our medical systems, so much is happening in the world. What else can we really rely on in terms of health? And the long-term project is viral. And I think this is like the most interesting part. So what we've learned very clearly in trying to disseminate this project over the last year is that it is incredibly hard for people to ask for help. No one wants to feel like a burden, especially when it feels like most of the people we know are in some state of emergency. So we know we cannot ask for support from people who are not supported. That fear of being a burden makes the project viral, and that's so interesting. So like basically that if that circle in the middle is me, and I have the hard lines to 3 circles, those are my 3 triangle members. My job is not to give what I receive from the people that support me. My job is to ensure they all have support themselves. So my friend who asks me questions about my physical health, I made sure that they have a triangle supporting them, if that's what they want. But because it actually is quite a beautiful, like a pretty like energizing type of conversation that happens in the hologram, generally the people that practice it do want to do it for themselves. So my job is to make sure that that's possible for them. And so in that way, it constantly grows. And it also hopefully morphs as it grows. So like the people that are doing it with me right now, in their holograms, it's probably quite a bit different than how it is in my hologram, because they adapt from what they learn. And so in a weird way, it's like, it's a practice and a story that kind of like moves through people and changes as it goes. I think the most important ideas are like simple and also really, really hard to practice and embody. The first is just that you really don't need to be broken or sick to need care and attention. And I think this is something that is so hard for us to understand, especially depending on the gender that we were raised in, or in the culture, in the economic situation that we were raised in. It can be really, really hard to actually believe and practice that. It takes a lot of work to receive good care. In this project, the person that is receiving care really is the convener and the teacher and the expert. And that's very different from how, at least biomedicine in the places that I've lived work, where the patient is the person that has the least amount of power. But because it's a lot of responsibility to receive the care that you need, it takes a lot of cooperation and communication. And those are muscles that we are not always super used to flexing. And finally, the person who gives care is not an expert. And so we kind of get to take the pressure off of the person that's the caregiver, so that it can become easier for more people to give care. And this really relates to some of what Marina was saying, which is that, like, you know, care does happen largely along gender and racialized lines. So there's a lot of us that are not trained, that we know that we can or should be living in a way where we're like supporting people and caring for people. Many people are not socialized to do that. So in this project, because in a weird way, the role of the caregiver, it's not without its skill, but it also, there's some pressure removed from it, so that more people can actually learn how to do it. And because as a caregiver, you're not alone, you don't need to play the hero or the expert. You can come into it as a person who doesn't have a lot of experience and potentially get much better at caregiving. So we've made it into a real online ritual, which we've refined, and now we teach like courses online. And in the courses, we're constantly learning more about the practice itself. It's a real laboratory. And as I said before, we also offer like lots of different chances for people to try it in a facilitated way. And now there's lots of people all over the world that are practicing it. And it's really growing, and it's really interesting. And I think maybe the most important thing that I'll leave on is just that the goal right now is like to take this from being something that's like Cassie Thornton's art project and really allowing it to become a totally decentralized project, a practice that anybody can use. And so we're sort of setting a timeline that is like, you know, I work with probably about 10 to 12 people right now developing and ironing it out and practicing it and distributing it. But like, hopefully by 2023, we can really like all disappear from it and use it and distribute it, but like watch it and support it. And it doesn't have to live in the art world any longer after that. I would like to see it as something without, I don't like this example is always like, it's great because it gives a great visualization, but it's also not great because people have pretty crappy experiences with it. But I think it could be something like AA, which is like something that grows and moves and multiplies as a kind of like cellular model that has some tools that you can use, but you can really take it and do what you will with it. So it could potentially be something like that someday, that's just really widely used by whoever wants it. And I would really like it to, I'd like it to be free of me, so it can do that. So I think I'm gonna leave it there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cassie. I think I'm going to have very quickly a first question, and maybe it will just spark, you know, a general conversation between us that would be able to flow more freely after that. Because, I mean, I'm struck by the idea, I mean, of course, reflecting on pandemic solidarity, also of the geographies of these networks of care, and which appear, of course, to be more related to ways people and communities live more in the global south, or what we could call the global south, even if like the status of Greece is, of course, a little bit particular because it has a lot to be, it has a lot of connections, let's say, with this idea of being from the global south, even if it's located in Europe. But so I want to know, like, are there international holograms already, like on a very detailed level, I guess? And yeah, can you maybe expand on the idea of how people from the south would maybe respond potentially in different manners than people located in global north?
The hologram is really popular in the worst places on earth, I think. And when I say the worst places on earth, I mean like financial centers in predominantly like white Anglo places. And that's because I think the initial project was like launched as something public from a gallery called Furtherfield in London. And so, and also because I think when it was started, it felt so experimental, and I got a lot of feedback that it made people feel really uncomfortable, that it was causing them to take risks that were really hard. So I began it thinking that I should use it with people that were like me. So like precarious artists and activists in American, UK, and Canadian, and some European cities. And so that kind of has played itself out in the last maybe like the first 6 months of it. So it was very like, it was traveling through the art world. It was hosted by lots of different arts institutions. And that was really great for sort of testing it first. And for like learning about it and having people that were open to it and able to talk about it, and who I wasn't afraid of, whose culture I like wouldn't understand and maybe not know how to like present to. And then over time, it has totally expanded. But I think sorry, I'm just gonna turn that sound down. I think it will expand much more. And I think I'd love nothing more than to have a chance to kind of travel with it and get more feedback from more people in more different places. But for right now, it has really funny traces, like in Palestine, in Mexico City, in Singapore, lots and lots of European people are really, really into it. So it's definitely got its tendrils reaching out. I think it's just a matter of time before those tendrils begin to do what Marina's project did and really begin to like follow. I think when people like begin to really trust it, they'll be able to like more consciously share it with people, with different types of people. It's really new still. Like it really feels like when people even present it to their friends, I can tell that there's a way in which people are, they're offering it to people who they know can handle it. And so those are often people, sorry, my computer's making all of these noises. They're often offering it to people who they feel are already living in a level of comfort where they can take the risks to try something new. So for right now, I think that's kind of where it's at, but it's definitely making its way. And because there's a large group of people, I have a ton of confidence that it's like, it's also going in places that I don't know yet. And I would be very curious to hear, like, I don't know, I think it's like, as I said before, like it would be so interesting to get a chance to present it to different groups of people in very different cultures and sort of hear how they're already doing things like this and what they would do or how they would kind of like hack it to make it more useful for them. I mean, I think that would be really interesting. I think we've just kind of gotten out of the phase where we were like figuring out like, what is this and how does it work? But maybe it would be an interesting time to connect with Marina about like who we could talk to and share it with, who would have interesting feedback.
I was actually just thinking how wonderful it would be, you know, that our two, you know, your project, the one I helped facilitate, how well they kind of work together. And actually you're speaking to people who are involved in these various networks all over the world, because now is that moment in particular where people are asking exactly these questions of what is care? What is, you know, the same way in the health clinics in Greece, they began to ask the question of, well, what does health even mean? Health is not just, you know, this physical body form and what happens with it, but health is social, it's society, all of these things that, you know, you address in the hologram. And I'm thinking it would be so wonderful, especially now, because I think as awful as crises are, they do, again, open us to more possibility in thinking differently, because all of these experts have generally failed us. So we have to look to ourselves. So it opens up possibility. And I think that would be a perfect time. So we should absolutely connect so that, you know, with all the different contributors who each interviewed people from many, many different networks. I mean, it's a little book, but the little book covers many dozens of groups and networks all over the world, working in different ways. And it would be so interesting too, to like have you in dialogue with, for example, in South Korea, their disability rights groups who were completely abandoned by the states. People with disabilities completely abandoned because care workers were not going into people's homes because it wasn't safe. But that meant people, especially people who were homebound, were homebound. And so they had to self-organize. And that's what they did with other people, but thinking about the forms that takes and the mutuality that's so beautiful in your project that adds to that. And then thinking beyond all of these systems and these experts. And it's totally transformative. Yeah, I think that's super exciting.
I loved that part of your book, of the book so much, the deinstitutionalized disability care work was so interesting. And like, I think the thing that got me about it was the risk taking, the people that were willing to go and actually like expose themselves to COVID as a way to care for people, and they just went in knowing it full well they were going to do that. And it was so moving to me, because I feel like in my city and in so many different situations that I've been watching from a distance too, like COVID creates this wall where like people can't make any of, like they can't take risks and they won't make other decisions to take risks. Like, for example, in my city, like, the shelters have become like almost, like very, very restricted. And or maybe or maybe not, this is a good example, but it's like an excuse to make people stay outside, and it's minus 40 degrees. And I feel like we're not balancing risks very well. Like, if you are exposed to minus 40 degrees for more than a few hours, like, you'll die for sure. But we're so afraid of COVID that we can't make a rational plan. And I thought that was so interesting that those people were like, actually, I've weighed the risks and I'm going to take them because it's worth it. It's like what I'm going to do. And I haven't really seen any other stories like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wonder, no, I do love that Ji Young did that chapter, and actually even she herself she traveled around South Korea interviewing people in the height of the pandemic when you weren't supposed to travel. So it was also kind of, she embodied this experience as well, because it was so important to share these stories, that kind of risk. And I wonder, and it's not to advocate, we're not, to put our lives at risk and things like that, but I wonder the fear we're told all the time. I mean, there is real fear. I'm not underestimating the real fear, but there's this, it's again, the kind of like counter narratives, the counter stories, so the story that we all have to be so afraid we have to stay inside. And yet what people actually do in these networks and things like that are the opposite. They go outside, and not necessarily in people's homes, but also if you thought about, I mean, I'm sure most people listening now, and maybe it's already happened, unfortunately, that a family member or a good friend got sick. Not just there was the potential, but they're actually sick. Do you bring them food? Yes, that's how people are getting food. The institutions in most places in the world, the government is not stepping in saying, oh, okay, here are people where they're sick. Let's bring doctors to their homes. Let's bring food. Let's bring warm food and healthy food. It's neighbors and friends who are doing this also. Like, that is really who we have to look to. And the idea of risk, it's a really interesting question. And it has, I keep looking at the fire behind you. And it is one of the cases in fires, you would think when someone yells fire, you would think people would run away. And they don't. All of the studies show, and historical examples show, if someone starts to yell fire, people come to see how they can help. In fact, in some parts of the United States, women's self-defense classes teach you that you should yell fire if you're being attacked. Now, there's a whole other conversation about, so why can't we yell sexual assault? But the idea that yelling fire would bring people to you, so that, again, I think we'll do more for one another than we're told, for sure, and we are.
Mm-hmm. One thing that comes up in the hologram all the time that I think is totally fascinating is like, when somebody wants to have like a hologram meeting for the first time, and they're like so nervous about asking people to join them, even if it's just for one time for 2 hours, they're like, it's so hard to like actually like ask for attention and support for like 2 hours. It just feels overwhelming I would say, to most people. And then the minute we actually get into the question asking, sometimes even before that, the 3 people that have been invited to play the triangle are like, oh my God, thank you so much for inviting me. I feel so like lucky that you chose me. And I'm just so happy to be here and to know how to support you. Because I think so often there's like a feeling like offering support is a withdrawal of energy. It's like, it's expensive. It's emotionally, emotional labor is like something that gets extracted from you and you can never get it back or something. But instead, like having instructions and communication about like how to care. I would like you to care about me in this way. and like, I'll tell you if it's not working. Like, people are so grateful for that amount, for that allowance, and for the structure, and to know that they're wanted and like that they're useful. And I feel like that's something that's like, that is not how we think so much from the outside of like crises and care. I feel like we don't think about them that way. But then I think when you get up close so often, not all the time, but so often, it's like, oh my God, I'm so happy to do that. I'm so happy to do this for you. There's nothing I'd rather do for it. There's nothing I'd rather be doing. And I think it like,
No, I love that. Yeah.
and it generates, I mean, it absolutely generates energy. Like, it's like, it's not every time, but it is 95% of the time that like, we do this stuff, you know, I mean, and I'm really so focused on the hologram, but I'm in this conversation, but I mean, even when I'm doing stuff like direct action support work on the street, like generally we do it and we're like, yes, like we have so much more energy, like it feels so much like more alive, and more connected when you're doing that stuff. It's really not, it's not negative. And I think that somehow we got confused about that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that about so many things about, I mean, I love the concreteness about your project as well. And this addressing this question of shame, I think that's so important, that shame as if having a conversation about care, you know, we're supposed to, and we are actually in so many places around the world taught that to have need, we should feel shame about, to need care is something we should feel shame about. And it's, you know, kind of laying out the way you do with the hologram allows people to kind of talk about that and break it. And it does remind me also of, I mean, the health clinics, obviously, and again, the Plataforma in Spain, where so many places around the world, when you're at risk of being evicted if you're a renter, or of losing your home that you own, you know, because of a mortgage crisis, people have felt shame about that. Like there's something wrong with you, with me, with us, because we have a financial challenge. And flipping that, which is what the Plataforma does in a similar kind of way of, you must have the conversation at first and share. And then it's through that conversation and sharing and getting that support, it's not an individual problem. One, it's something way more systemic, and being able to see it as systemic and general. But also getting that then, you know, seeing it collectively and being able to shift and change it. And yeah, I think this is just such a great project. Yeah.
The PA has been such a big inspiration to me. The PA really helped me figure out, when I was living in the Bay Area, and working a lot with the strike debt, like that we were always trying to figure out how you would get people to take risks on each other's behalves, the way they did in the PA. Like, so if you go to an assembly, you find out that somebody else is getting evicted or losing their home, like right away it's like, okay, well, like we're obviously going to go support them, or like we're going to go to the bank and make sure that like they don't get to sign whatever documents to cancel the loan. And then you go next, you know, and you keep going. And then eventually when it comes to you, like, and your house is foreclosed, like you have all these other people that you've been supporting, they're going to support you, of course. And I remember like different types of organizing in strike debt, where we were really trying to figure out how you would be able to distribute, we keep talking about risk today, but like how you would distribute risk like that, like how you would get other people to sort of take risks on each other's behalves. And I don't think we ever really figured that out. Because in a weird way, like debt and financial stuff can be so abstract, and it was really hard to figure out how we would exactly make that happen. So I think that is the PA, and that work is like directly inspiring to the way that the hologram is necessarily viral. That it's like, it doesn't want to get stuck between just two people going back and forth infinitely. Or even in a small group, it's always like looking outward. It's very much more about trying to make culture than trying to make, to like just shift like one relationship. But I think that that's the thing about any of this work, like any of the mutual aid projects you're talking about too, like they all shift culture and they all change how we behave and how we are able to take risks for each other, probably for the rest of our lives. Like, it'll be really interesting to see what happens to all these people now.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, and I think that's where having the conversations as much as possible to think about scaling outward, and thinking about risks. It reminds me also of, because in the Plataforma, people take these risks with their bodies, putting themselves on the line for each other. And in Argentina many years ago, but it's still true in the recuperated workplaces, I can still remember one of my first conversations with someone, Candido, in a print shop in Buenos Aires. And he was talking about love. So política afectiva, but then he was also talking about love. And this is like kind of macho guy-ish, talking about like love in their organizing, but saying that part of the core in these relationships is the care they develop for one another, the love they develop in that relationship. And of course, the more care and love you have for someone, the more you're willing to risk for them. So he linked it directly to when then the police came to try and evict them, more people were willing to do more, so in a kind of sense of militancy, to protect one another because of this relationship of trust and care. And so that, being kind of central, I think, to all we're doing. And hopefully in these different networks, I think they are different in different parts of the world. I wonder, how do we scale them over more, and how do we network them with each other? We've been trying to do that. We, like the people in Colectiva Sembrar, in our different places around the world, trying to have more global conversations. And for some reason, they're not happening as much. I'm not sure what we're doing, if we're not inviting people into the conversation in a way that's working, or maybe it's we in some collective way are still not believing enough that we really can transform everything, because crisis also creates so much fear. So there's possibility in fear. And is it that? I don't know, but there seems to be like a block in imagining this further, if that makes sense. Like people can see what they're doing and see that it's really important in different places. And in some places, the conversation is very much about social transformation, political transformation. In Turkey, with a lot of people, it's along those lines, and different in Argentina. And then in some places, less so. So what, how do we help contribute to the conversation to kind of raise it up a whole nother level, to not just be about surviving this one crisis, but stopping these kinds of crises? I know, big question, but what do we do?
I mean, I can only speak for a little bit about, and the thing that occurs to me is that where I am, it feels like we're so focused. Things are so hard here right now that I can't imagine looking outward. And I wonder what temporality, like I think we're all dealing with COVID and the state response and the fallout from the past year. It's like it's coming and going at such a weird pace in different places. And I particularly right now, more than this whole rest of the year, we're in the harshest part of the whole thing right now. And I don't know if that's like how common that is around the world, because when this happens, it's really hard to pick your head up. But I mean, I know like in our groups here that we're very much talking about like the next crisis. Like we're already knowing, because we've had like 2 very severe waves here, but like this wave being worse than the first one, we're already very aware of the next one. And so that's a part of our conversation, but it feels so isolated. And that, I mean, part of that is just having the problems feel so heavy that it's kind of hard to look outward. So I think, I'm not defending the fact that people aren't looking outward, but I'm just wondering if it's not different states of the state that we're in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And then how do you begin to reach out? I mean, in the moments before the current crisis that we're in here right now, I remembered reaching out to a journalist in Rojava and being like, we would love to connect with you and just compare notes a little bit, because there's some similar organizing happening here. And it was so interesting because it was like, you know, I got one message and then the follow-up, and then there was no follow-up, and I just assumed that things got really hard there. So I don't know how to make a kind of global conversation that can like ebb and flow, and you can come and go, but that has consistency, but that feels like what is needed, and that feels like what you're already building. And then the vision piece feels really hard because like, it's just so, time feels so difficult right now. Like, it's so hard to imagine the future, and it's easy to kind of keep doing what you're already doing. But I think like, I mean, the hologram has helped me so much to actually have a sense that I could plan. Like I know that my group is going to keep meeting for 5 years. So I know 5 years will exist. But how else do we get ourselves and each other to actually be able to like have a plan where we can actually see beyond like the many types of reactions that we have to whatever happens? Like what can we plan in that? It feels really complicated when it's hard to imagine what you've never seen before. But yeah, quite a thing to work on.
Yeah, thank you. I guess it would be time for us to open also this discussion to the audience and just start taking the questions. But of course, I mean, there's so much more that could be said that, yeah, I think we're going to have a great bunch of questions coming in. Yeah, so of course, just one thing to start. As you can see, we had to pre-record the first part of this session, and Marina apologizes for not being able to stay with us for the Q&A. But of course, if you feel like asking her a question, please leave it in the YouTube or in the Facebook chat, and I'll transmit it to her, and we'll post her answer later. But Cassie Thornton is still with us, so please do not hesitate also to ask her any question you may have or post any comment. And for now, I guess I'll start and ask her to come back to this idea of gender representation in these networks of care, and to expand a bit on that when it comes to the hologram, because I was wondering, is this situation similar to the one described by Marina about collective assembrar, that it is that most participants are women?
Definitely, this is something that we are thinking about a lot. The project takes into account the fact that like support work is so often provided by people along like racial and gendered lines. So specifically related to gender, I think that we have very few cis men that have participated in all the various permutations of the hologram so far, but there are some. I think it's really interesting. We have a lot of conversations about pronouns and making a space that's really welcoming to an intergenerational group of people, and specifically kind of helping older women who've not been exposed to like what's happened in terms of gender and the importance of kind of welcoming in non-binary folks into like the space of care and feminism. So we've been really working on kind of creating a space that's really, really welcome to all people, but that specifically is open to like women, trans, non-binary folks to begin, and then slowly working to open more and more up so that we can really support men and people who have never been kind of put in a position to be trusted as like sort of carers or supporters, and to make, I think we're working really hard to try to make a language that might begin to make the practice more habitable for men and for masculine people in general, because I think what we're learning is that a lot of the terminology we use in care work does kind of move, it moves with different people in different ways. we were just learning from speaking to somebody that is a part of a lot of like men's care organizing, that a lot of men don't identify as carers or caregivers. They see themselves as supporters. And so I think we're kind of going to be experimenting with what it means to sort of transform our language to make it more accessible across gender lines. One thing that I think is really valuable about the hologram is that because when you're a member of a triangle, you can be in a supportive role but not be the only supporter. And so people who are not as experienced giving care who might experience a lot of anxiety around the idea of participating in something like this, they're not thrown in alone. So it's kind of an amazing place to learn. And so starting in the spring, we are going to host our first course for people who identify as men. It won't be an all male space or anything, but it will be a space specifically for men to practice and play with this project, and also so we can learn a little bit more about what it would take to open it up to more different people. Yeah.
Yeah, so for now, for instance, most of the triangles were women to women, and like the hologram were women too. Like even in any like art center or any art world place.
It's women, femmes, transgender people, not a lot of cis men, but some, maybe like 20% or 15%.
Yeah, I was curious also because I read a few things about men support group, like men only support group, and I'm not sure we have that a lot in Europe. Apparently, there's like quite many in the US, and apparently it works really well. But I've also heard very recently, while I was advertising for this evening session to other people, I met a psychologist last weekend who told me about these kind of networks of care and peer-to-peer care networks in Europe, mostly in Belgium, but also in the south of France. And he said, yeah, it's expanding, like, and of course, very different names. But also, have you been in touch with this kind of people, or all over the world? Or
there's specifically people in North America have contacted us, but there's definitely a network of groups that are that are formed for men to learn how to kind of share their feelings, and they're organized in lots of different ways. But we've been working with some people who have been a part of those groups as a way to help us design a kind of set of workshops that are going to try to be more focused on and open to men.
And also, I was wondering, like, it's a little bit a different topic, but as Marina was mentioning people imprisoned, I was wondering if you also thought of expanding the hologram in such specific and terrible spaces.
I think it's the biggest dream is that we could allow people who are incarcerated, especially people like who know that they will be released, to arrange a triangle for themselves that could help them bridge the transformation from the inside of prison to the outside. And I think it's definitely going to take a lot of work to figure out how to transform the project and the practice to speak to those people and to make those tools available. But I think it's such an interesting idea, because if you can imagine, like, I've done some like prisoner support work in the past, and as a volunteer for an organization, like, I've helped people leave prison. Like, I've picked them up and I've brought them toothpaste and tried to get them signed up for a cell phone, and then began to help them try to find an apartment. And it was always much more work than one person could do. And I feel like it's probably more work than 3 people can do, but it's much more likely that I think a person with 3 support people could really actually feel kind of, feel the sort of support they need that's both like logistical, emotional, and everything else as they kind of transform. So yeah, I think it's like the best thing that could happen to the project. And I love the idea that like the people that would be potentially supporting the person as they transition, some of those people might be incarcerated and some of them might be on the outside already, but that the project would necessitate that those people have support too. Because I think this is like a thing that happens in all different forms of activism, that like you put yourself out as a way to help, but then if you don't have the support needed to help yourself, you can't keep doing the work. And so all kinds of problems arise because the projects can't survive. So anyway, I think it would be so amazing because that would definitely be the dream.
Yeah, I didn't know you were involved in this kind of processes before. So, but not in any artistic way, like in a proper activist or personal way of working.
Both. I've worked in 3 or 4 prisons as like an art teacher, and especially, I mean, mostly in the US and now in Canada a little bit. And yeah, I mean, I've been focused on it quite a lot actually. So I think for me, the hologram has to be a kind of abolitionist project in order for it to be a project worth doing. Like it always has to come back to the idea that we're trying to build like tools and infrastructure and like personal skills that would make it possible to live in a world without police and without prisons. And I just think it's part of the work that's sort of underground but super necessary in order for like those things to happen in a healthy way.
All right, I was checking, but I don't see any questions right now, so I'm gonna go on and enjoy asking my own questions for now. So I was also thinking it would be interesting for people listening to us, even if it's later on the replay, to replace the hologram in your practice more generally, and especially in your work around the idea of debt. And I was wondering if you could maybe present the work you did that is titled Men Running Out of Money, as I think there's like some strong similarity there in the way you ask people to expose their fears, their personal fears in a way, and also talk about it in a non-conventional way, which is like not with a therapist or with their banker or like with anyone you're supposed to talk about this with. So
yeah. I haven't thought about this for a while, but I mean, all of my work for about a decade was about getting people to think about debt and finance in a different way, to see how much the economy and the way that works affects what most people think is possible and real. So I did loads and loads of different types of projects where I was like, getting people basically to imagine debt as like an architecture that they were living in. So I did like hypnosis and I taught yoga and I did all kinds of stuff to try to get people to imagine it outside of them. And I ended up talking to so many people about their relationship to debt. And I was like all kinds of people, like hedge fund managers and debt traders and school teachers and young kids and security guards and you name it. And what I ended up feeling like was that like basically debt and all the sort of disciplinary like economic systems that we live with make it so that we live in like the most boring reality possible. Just like such a snoozer, just everybody's fighting for their own survival. Everybody's working on their own image. We're all working constantly. We don't really know what it means to play or to like live well, because we're so focused on like our own financial survival. And so I think like after a decade of really looking at debt and its control over us, I was just dying to have an antidote, like a suggestion, something that would be an offering that wouldn't just be more work about revealing the problem, but actually making a suggestion for something that we could do. And so like about 5 years ago or so, I did an interview with a bunch of people that I knew who were living in cities in the US. And I was asking my friends who were like women and femmes to tell me like what their life is like in relation to money, because I felt like money was something that, even though I knew everybody really well and I knew that they were struggling financially, I didn't really know how they really felt about it or what their real conditions were, because money is such a hard thing to talk about. So I sent this survey to like 30 of my friends, really living in all different types of conditions. And I asked them about like what is it like when they run out of money? Like, how do they feel? And what are the situations when they do run out of money? What are like the processes they go through? What do they think about? How do they feel? What kind of scams have they participated in or developed so that they could survive financially? And I didn't know why I was doing it. I was just doing it, and I was really trying to figure out like a way for more people to talk about it. Because even though I was like a anti-debt organizer with Strike Debt, like most of my friends would never come to our meetings. So I ended up with these 30 interviews that were so amazing, and that taught me so much, and also like helped me so much, because at the time I was living with a lot of poverty too, and some of the scams were really helpful. Like how to buy a mattress from an online ordering system where you can return it after 3 months, no matter what. I did it many times. And so I ended up deciding to make a video out of some of the responses, which unfortunately at the time I didn't ask for permission from my friends because I didn't know I was going to do it. So I got in some trouble with my friends, but I ended up asking workers on Fiverr, the gig economy site, who were men, to take parts of the surveys where people were really talking about their vulnerability in relationship to money. And I had these men just perform the responses that had been given by women. And it was really interesting because a lot of the gig workers refused it. I think like about half the people that I asked decided that they wouldn't do it. So I ended up with this video, though, of about 15 men saying texts that were written by women in response to my survey about the trouble of running out of money. And I think it's a really beautiful video with, performed by people that are really trying to actually perform something of the emotion associated with running out of money. And so for me, the hologram is like, it's a really structured way of getting past this sort of very stagnant sense of the economy being the thing that decides like what we can do and how we do it. Like the hologram, it's actually like giving you instructions for how to sort of sacrifice, sacrifice your time. To sacrifice it from, or what is it, like to take the really precious hours of the day, which we usually use to go towards the development of like our image or our money in some way, or our financial survival, and to actually like sacrifice that and make it available for something else. And to see that transformation of your time as something that produces more energy and more health rather than contributes to the economy, where we're constantly trying to develop more capital, whether it's human capital or personal capital or financial capital. I just saw it as this possibility kind of hidden in plain sight, that we could kind of just sort of reorganize, like give ourselves a structure that we could reorganize our energy in a way that felt good, without really having to like change everything in our lives. And yeah, I think like there's so much kind of confusion about like what we should be doing, especially like in response to all the many overlapping crises, that I think it's just such a gift to get a sort of structure to work in and push up against. that doesn't have anything to do with money or with one's like future ability to make money, but actually like has to do with us feeling like we have the authority to take care of ourselves and of our friends, without contributing to like exhaustion or burnout. And I think like that, I think the best part of the hologram in relation to debt is that debt basically creates a situation where you don't really want to imagine the future, because you know that it means that you're going to have to work more to pay back the debt. And potentially, maybe if you're an artist, like work in ways that are directly against your values. Well, not just if you're an artist, if you're anybody, but potentially you have to work in a way that goes against what you believe in order to pay off the debt. And the hologram deals with time in quite a different way, which is like, you can make an agreement with your friends that you're going to keep working together in the hologram formation for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, and look forward to like knowing more and having more support. And it doesn't cost anything. It's like, it's something to move towards, and it gives you a chance to do some radical planning that is kind of unimaginable in a debt-based reality where everything feels so kind of hand to mouth.
Yeah, I mean, I always have this sort of weird idea to most people that a lot of the money we need in our lives and most of our energy is used to just for the conservation of our means of working. And actually, if we didn't work for money, we would spend way less in our daily lives, because we have to live close by to our workplaces, our commute, and spend so much money around those, in all those areas, that actually working costs a lot and is actually not mostly economically viable for a lot of people. So I think, we can.
Culturally, it's so important. Like, it feels very weird not to work, because that's like how we also like value ourselves and stuff. And it's hard to do that without a set of it's hard to not work in a world that values work so much without a kind of structure in place that helps you be able to do that and value it. So I think it's interesting. Like I think a lot of the people that are using the hologram now originally said that they didn't have time for it. But because it's so prescriptive and it's such a clear structure and container, I think it's more possible to participate in it, directly, because you're like, well, I'm not working, I'm doing something else. Even though that something else is like a total, like, wonderful waste of time in terms of what the economy says.
Yeah, and do you actually have feedback already around this point from these people? Or like, how does it fit in their life? And like the people around them, do they understand what they do? And I mean, does it expand also in their really close circles?
Yeah, it's so interesting. But like, just in the last couple of days, I've been sort of recognizing that the people that are the core organizers for the hologram now, we are so surrounded, like all of our families and friends are doing it. And that felt so impossible a year ago when we really tried to make it more accessible. But like the person that I facilitate courses with, her mother and sister are doing it, and most of her closest friends are doing it. And I think it's so interesting how much energy that has provided. I can see it more for somebody outside of myself than in my own situation, but for my co-facilitator, it's so interesting because it's like, by having the people closest to her in her life be supported, it's like she actually has a lot more freedom to be a good friend for those same people, because all of the care labor doesn't fall on her. And I definitely know that some of my closest friends who are not organizers for the hologram, who have gone through the course or whatever, they're actually using it. I mean, it's still just been like maybe for some people like 3 months and some people maybe 6 or 9 months, but they're using it. And I think that as they grow to trust it more and it becomes more of a part of their life and not like an experimental project, I can really witness the difference. And I can also sense that the cool part for me means that like I can be friends with people and not feel like every time I'm talking to them, we're just dealing with crisis. There's like more space because they're more supported, which was totally the goal, because I think in some way, like what was happening to me at the beginning of the pandemic and throughout the last many years is that I felt like all my friends were in crisis all the time in such a way that like sometimes I couldn't actually answer the phone because I couldn't offer the support that they needed. And I just felt really, really tired. And it's when you do it with 3 people, it's like way more fun and like way more comes out of it. And it feels so much lighter. So yeah, I'm like really grateful to have it right now, especially as I feel like, I don't know about other people, but in my city, like I had said in the conversation with Marina, like things are getting a lot worse here really quickly for a lot of people. And so I'm so grateful that some of my friends are using the hologram, because in a weird way, it like just means that like more people are more taken care of. And it just feels a lot lighter.
Yeah, I think I can only encourage people watching us right now to just like dig into it and have a look at the hologram manual, I like to call your book this way. And it's gonna be time to wrap it up for now. For those who are still with us, actually, I'm gonna give you this little gift I promised in the introduction. So Pluto Press is generously offering a 30% discount on Marina and Cassie's books, either the physical books or the e-books, or both, actually. And so you would have to enter the care to care in capitals, care to care in only one word code when you would order the books in the coming days after this session. And I think I have to thank you a lot for this discussion. I'm super happy to open my season of the lab with you. So thank you, and have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.